So speaking of work, what happens when you work? When you work, you get paid. And once you get paid, then there's taxes. And there's a bunch of stuff coming out right now in terms of taxes. Really interesting stuff. And they took a look at what happened last week as people paid their taxes and what they were expecting to come in based on the returns. Because remember, a lot of people have sent in the digital return like weeks ago. Last week on the 18th was the deadline. I think it was Tuesday, and they gave us all a couple extra days because April 15th fell on a weekend this year. So, very interesting poll. Tax day came and went, and they started asking people. 56% of America said that the amount they pay in taxes is more than my fair share. And that was up from 51% in 2019, just 3 years ago, for people who said, I pay more than my fair share. Now, what's interesting, 66% of people that were surveyed in this, 2 out of 3, felt that the wealthy don't pay their share. I'm about to show you that this is a talking point. And people have heard it long enough. You've heard the phrase, right? You say something to someone enough times and they will start to believe it's true. And that's part of audience manipulation, citizenship manipulation, and it happens. The wealthy don't pay their fair share. We've heard that drum beating. People like Bernie, who says the word billionaires in every speech he gives now. Billionaires, billionaires. By the way, he used to say millionaires and billionaires. Then he became a millionaire himself with several houses, and his wife and him have a net worth between, I guess it's $5 to $6 million or more. So he's done okay. As a humble congressman and senator, he's done okay. Wonder how that worked. Wonder what information he's using trading stocks or something. Anyway, one way or another, he sure profited from a career in public service. So now he just says, billionaires, billionaires, billionaires. That narrative is in the head of these people that are surveyed because, here come the numbers. 61% said, I would support raising taxes on people that make more than 400 grand. That sure sounds like a lot. Well, especially if you just heard the average income in America was down, $56,000. But they couldn't say why you support raising it. And they couldn't say, anything about the rationale for their feelings. It was just, well, they've heard it and that's how they felt. There's the example of how telling them enough times the wealthy don't pay their share has gotten into their head. But what constitutes the fair share? Ready for this? Here we go. According to the IRS, the top 1% of taxpayers, 1.5 million households in America, paid $722 billion in taxes. That was 42% of all the taxes paid. The top 1% paid 42% of all the taxes paid. Okay, you still think you don't tax the wealthy enough? Wow. By contrast, you go to the bottom 90% of taxpayers, the bottom 90%, they only paid a combined $450 billion in taxes, or just 2.63% of the total. That was the lowest percentage for the 90% in decades. Let me say that again. The bottom 90% paid only 26.3% of the total tax dollars, the lowest percentage of the total tax paid by that 90% in decades. In other words, they are taxed less than they have in decades, whereas the wealthy continue to be. So let's dive in the numbers. So that means the top 1% are paying more of the nation's taxes than the bottom 142 million people combined. So, well, wait a minute. Is it that the wealthy pay a larger amount because they earn the most money? Not exactly. In 2020, the top 1% of taxpayers earned only 22% of all income. So here's all the income. They earned 22% of it, but they paid 42% of the income tax. So in other words, that's almost 44%. And if it was 44%, then they made 22% of the money and paid 44% of the taxes. The opposite's true for the bottom 90%. They earn more than half, or 50%, of the nation's income. So the bottom 90% earned 50% of the income and paid 26% of the taxes. So it hasn't always been this way. Look at the disparity. So every time you hear, you know, we got to tax the billionaires, we have to do this. No, go take a look at the truth. The top 1%, again, earns 22% of the income, pays 42% of the taxes, and the bottom 90% earn 50% of the income and paid 26% of the taxes. Look at the truth. Those are the numbers. But that hasn't always been the case. Did you know in 1980, the taxes were more evenly shared? The bottom 90% made 68% of the dollars and paid 52% of the taxes. I'll say it again. In 1980, 90% of America earned 68% of the income, paid 52% of the taxes. And the top 1% only earned 9.6% of the nation's income and paid 17% of the taxes. So the taxes have become much more progressive. And people can say, well, it's because income disparity, because the income is running to the 1%. Well, that may be true, but they're also, the taxes they're paying are higher. So you could say we have an income disparity, but they are paying. And so the point, the wealthy have to pay their fair share, the wealthy have to do this, the wealthy have to do that. You know what the truth of it is, if you really look at all the numbers, is that the wealthy are paying an awful lot of their share of the, a very large percent of their share of the tax. So I think what you need to do is also take a look at what is happening. The IRS has dramatically changed from being the administrator of our taxes to doing something else. Do you know what is the largest program administered in the federal government? It's the IRS. And the programs that are aimed at schools, low-income families, and children are administered by the IRS. The Child Care Tax Credit, the Earned Income Tax Credit. Those two programs put $180 billion worth of benefits into the bottom 90%, and to be more exact, into the bottom 40%. So meaning, by the way, I'm going to get into something else in a minute, that there is a huge percent of Americans that pay no taxes, but they get a refund check for turning in a tax return that showed they paid no taxes because they got tax credit. So they received a refund check for the IRS. In other words, they're receiving money for programs through the IRS. Think about that. Now, we can debate all day long if these programs are good or bad, and I want to go take a look at them because I think many of them are really good programs that are helping people, and the reason they don't pay taxes is because they're below a certain threshold and they could use some help. But since the mid-1990s, check this out. The tax credits have multiplied like rabbits. Here are the tax credits that the federal government will give you now. They will give you one for adoptions, for putting your kids in daycare. They'll give you a tax credit for putting your grandparents in senior care, for paying for college, for buying an electric car. Remember when you get $7,500 off the electric car? That's a tax credit. That's the IRS paying for part of your car. For putting solar panels on your roof, for buying health insurance. The IRS is now a super agency of social services. Did you know that? Now you do. The IRS actually is a super agency. So these responsibilities, I think, are beyond the capacity of a tax collection agency. No wonder it can't function. No wonder they want 86,000 some officers to go out and squeeze people even harder on taxes. If the Congress believes these benefits are important for families, another agency should be providing them through a spending program, not through the tax code. And they should simplify the tax code, maybe work it to a flat tax. So you know what the result of this? this is called unintended consequences. Just like having a work from home policy had the unintended consequences of some of your engineers that actually didn't have the same standards for ethics and integrity, took 2 jobs and were doing software coding for 2 companies paying them $80,000 each. So they were sitting there at home with 2 laptops, not operating at full peak. The unintended consequence of work from home is people that didn't have high integrity standards ripped off companies. And as we saw from that one company where the CEO came out and said, and our IT people went out and sensed the laptops, and a bunch of them were not even open for a month. Those are called unintended consequences of work from home. You want to see the unintended consequences of what's the IRS? The number of taxpayers that pay no taxes is at a record high. In pre-pandemic, like 2019, it was, Kellyanne?
Yes.
34% of taxpayers, 54 million households, paid no income taxes because of the tax credits. And many of them actually got a check from the government even though they had a 0 tax owed, because these are the tax credits. And again, I'm saying if these are necessary, and tax credits for adopting so that the pressure is not on the foster care system, I think that's good. I think putting your kids in daycare, that's a good credit so people can work as single parents. I think that's a good credit. Putting grandparents in senior care, paying for college, I think these are good credits or things that are good. But shouldn't they be administered by a government agency on spending? Now, if you think you heard the Biz Doc just say, I'm in favor of expanding government agencies, no, I am not. But Health and Human Services, HHS, and the Department of Education, which I think should be abolished in the first place, there are agencies that are out there that, why aren't they providing these? Why are these coming through the tax code? Why don't we simplify the tax code and move these credits to programs on a needs-based? So the rhetoric of the wealthy don't pay their fair share, guess what? Numbers talk, words talk, words spin, numbers scream. And look at the numbers, they're screaming here. The wealthy, there may be an income inequality in this nation that's getting higher, but there certainly is also a massive tax burden inequality that's happening. You may say, well, these people can afford it, and that's what it's going to be. Yeah, but they're not getting off scot-free, and they're not paying no taxes. They're paying the vast majority of the taxes to pay for battleships, national parks, and a lot of other things, such as, putting your kids in daycare. So if they say it enough times and you start believing, tax the wealthy, just remember all those entrepreneurs out there that are building companies, and that's where jobs come from. That is the job engine of this nation. And let's look at the truth of what the wealthy are paying, and then let's take a look at that and see maybe if there's not some room to kind of calibrate our understanding and share with other people. You may not like it, and you may not like how many billionaires that there are out there, but you can't say that they didn't get there selling drugs. They got there building companies.